20 creepy stories of places that shouldn't exist. According to Reddit. Number 20. Ten years ago, my friend and I were bored one night and were driving around. We were on a highway in New Jersey, about 30 minutes from our houses, and through the trees in the middle of nowhere, we see this beautiful, freshly paved cement pathway, with lampposts every 100 feet, just lighting this pathway up. It was beckoning to us. And so, we found the nearest exit. We drove around for a while, through the darkness until the road came to a dead end, and the path began.
Slap it on some toast.
Thank you, Striped Goon. We got out, started walking on this path, and as we make it through the trees, these beautiful, wide-open fields eventually end at a small town after a couple of miles. At this point, it's like 2 a.m. In a small town like this, nothing should be open except for the pizzeria, which was odd. So we go in. It's empty, except for an older gentleman behind the counter. We order food and start eating. Then another older customer walks in. The gentleman behind the counter and this customer do a double take at one another and then smile. Both of them run around the corner and embrace. Mario, Stefano, what has it been, 40 years? They talk the whole time about their childhood, growing up and back in Italy. We think, what are the chances that we would be here at this moment, seeing friends reunited after 40 years? Just plain odd. My friend and I, we finish up, and we head down the brightly lit path and back to the car. We call it a night. Ever since that night, my friend and I try to find that brightly lit path, but to no avail. We haven't seen it since, from the highway or driving down that road. In that small town, the pizzeria is there, but it closes at 10 p.m. No explanation why it was open at 2 a.m. Just plain odd. Something we never could explain. It's an unlikely moment to watch two friends reunite after 40 years. Number 19. A few years ago, I was driving home from Florida to Pennsylvania with 3 of my friends. It was late, probably sometime between 1 and 3 in the morning. We were somewhere in North Carolina. We needed gas soon, so we agreed to take the next exit off the highway that had a gas station. The second I took the exit, it was pitch black. There were no street lights along the exit ramp or the roads up ahead. The only lights in the area were coming from the headlights and the lights from the 95 behind us. The sheer darkness was enough to creep me out, especially because my vision isn't the best to begin with, but it really sucks when it's super dark. We really needed gas, so we press on. While driving to the gas station, the only building we saw was a massive, old-looking church. We drove by a sign informing us that we were in a town, but there were no businesses or houses other than the church. When we finally got to the gas station, we saw an assortment of giant farm animal statues outside the building, standing tall, barely illuminated. They weren't fenced off. There was no signs explaining why they were there. So, if it's considered an attraction, it's a confusing one, at best. However, the weirdest thing that happened inside the gas station. With me on the strip was another girl and two guys. We had all been friends for years, and our dynamic includes making fun of each other a lot, but never deliberately messing with each other's heads. At this point in our trip, we were all tired and just eager to get home. The gas station itself was huge on the inside, filled to the brim with shelves, all of which were jam-packed with an assortment of junk food and junk items. In hindsight, this seems weird given how empty the town was, but at the time we were all distracted by just how much stuff this gas station held. The other girl and I went to the restroom while the two guys paid for the gas. The restroom was hard to get to. There were boxes piled just outside the door, and the sign just had a piece of paper with "Women" scrawled across it in green highlighter. Upon leaving the restroom, we saw one of our friends entering the men's restroom, which was also marked by a piece of paper with "Men" written in highlighter. He gave us a weird look as we entered, but we shrugged it off and walked towards our other friend, who we could see standing at a shelf a bit away. He was facing away from us, and as we approached, I started to get a bad feeling in my stomach. As we got closer, he turned and gave us the most sinister look I've ever seen. Alarm bells are going off in my head at this point, and my female friend and I proceed to the car, unsure of what to make of the interaction we just had. The second we stepped outside and looked towards the gas pumps, we saw the same two friends that we had just seen standing behind us. The one who was entering the bathroom was leaning casually against the car, while the one who gave us a sinister look was just finishing up pumping gas. My female friend and I were dumbfounded and asked them how they were standing in front of us when they were both behind us just seconds ago. They looked at us like we had multiple heads. After paying for the gas, the two immediately went back out to the car, as the gas station gave off too weird of a vibe to wait in there for us. Sufficiently creeped us out, we piled back into the car and noped the fuck out of there. I'm not sure why we saw two of my friends' doppelgangers in the gas station, or why the doppelgangers seemed to be in such a pissy mood. I'm not really sure why the gas station had a collection of farm animal statues outside of it. I'm pretty content never going there again. That place definitely should not exist. Number 18. Thank you, Prelude. In the 7th grade, I had a friend that lived near a beach on a bay of Lake Michigan. One day, in early May, it reached 70 degrees, nearly unheard of for that time of year in northern Wisconsin. My two friends, including the beach friend, excitedly rode our bikes down to the beach to maybe dip our toes in, expecting still frigid waters, and then tan for the rest of the afternoon. The water, though, was surprisingly warm, like bath water warm. In this particular area of the bay, the water was shallow for about half a mile out, and we joyously splashed around, wading deeper and deeper until we were about chest deep. As we dunked each other and swam with abandon, I started to feel sick. Bad headache, nausea, wobbly. Just then, my other two friends mentioned that they also felt sick. We headed back to shore, nearly crawling by the time we got out. The three of us collapsed under a tree and fell asleep for 2-ish hours. When we woke up, we talked about how weird it was. I dipped my toe back in the water, and it was freezing cold. To this day, I have no idea what was in there. I do know that there is a chemical plant in town that used to manufacture things like Agent Orange. Their practices were known to be the less than environmentally conscious type. I have never touched that water since. Number 17. I remember we went camping once, and I got on my bike and rode with my dad through the woods. It was a short loop, pretty well on the beaten path. The next day I decided to go again, but my dad was doing something else, so I went alone. At one point I got to a fork, and I thought I remembered, but of course I took the wrong turn. I kept riding and riding. I knew I had taken a wrong turn at that point, but figured maybe it was a different loop, and would come out on a main road at some point. I passed 2 girls and 2 guys backpacking on my way down the trail. They looked normal enough, but confused when they looked at me. Finally, I see a sign that says primitive campsite ahead, thinking it was just a weird way of referring to a campsite with tents and stuff. Nope, it's just some logs and a fire pit in the middle of the woods. I guess the destination the hikers were going to. So I press on, and the trail just ends. Literally, it just disappears into a field of tall grass. I had ridden for an hour and figured I should just turn back, so I start back. I start getting this feeling like I'm being watched. I heard some snaps in the woods. I thought it was a bear. I sped up. I come to the hikers again. This time there are only 3 of them. One of the guys was missing, and they actively avoid looking at me. Dead silent. No conversation. All this made me nope the fuck out, and I started riding high speed through these trails as fast as I could, all the way back to the campsite. I was scared shitless, but was a little embarrassed, so I told my dad I took a wrong turn, and that I saw a bear. Number 16. A group of friends and I decided to take a small Saturday afternoon road trip into the backcountry of South Carolina. We figured we'd just drive around, head southwest, see if we could find some antique shops, cemeteries, abandoned buildings, shit like this. We pile into the car and just start driving. It's about an hour of nothing, just some light conversation and southern pine forests. We pass a few horse farms, some quaint old mills, a few gas stations, but nothing interesting yet. 2 p.m. rolls around and we decide we wanted to get something to eat. As a rule, we always like to try local diners and restaurants, so we kept driving until we saw a faded road sign for a town. It was about 5 miles down the road, and we figured that's a great enough spot. We're driving through town, and we notice there's no one out. No cars on the roads, no people in the streets, no real houses. The streets are lined with abandoned and boarded up warehouses, shops with the broken windows, a few broken down cars from the 90s. The further we go, the worse it gets. We finally get to a diner that's right off the main street. This looks like a good idea, they thought to themselves. It looks like there's about 10 people eating inside, and there's a few cars in the parking lot. Seems like they're open. Here's where it starts to get weird. We open the door and step in. As soon as we clear the threshold, everyone stares at us. It's like in movies, where the record scratches on the jukebox and everyone looks up, except far more uncomfortable. In the middle of the diner is a large table with 6 people around it, who all turn back to their food and start whisper talking. The waitress nervously shuffles up to us and quietly asks how many. You should have turned the fuck around and left. My friend Chris takes the lead and says, 4, in this normal speaking voice. What? Everyone looks at us again, and the waitress, who looks barely older than 16, recoils, but takes us to our table. She sat us in a basic 4-top near the large table in the middle. She takes our drink orders and leaves. Once she goes, we all whisper about how weird that was. And while we're talking, the line cook is just staring at us with violent look in his eye. We all figure out what we want and wait. We sit in awkward silence for about 10 minutes before the waitress comes back. She takes our orders and disappears into the back of the diner, leaving us alone in the dining room with the people at the other table. We take some time to look them over. They're a basic Southern family. Chubby, haggard-looking wife, husband with sun-leathered skin, oil stains on his coveralls, 3 children, all girls, all in nice Sunday dresses. And then, her. The other woman was dressed like the younger girls, but looked very much in her 40s. She wore a red paisley patterned dress with frilled lace at the collars and cuffs. Her hair was long and stringy and covered with bulk of her round face. The bulk. To the left of her was a doll seated in a high chair for babies. The woman would sometimes lean in towards the doll and whisper something and then giggle. Soon the waitress dropped off the food at their table, but set a meal down for the doll, too. She commented on how pretty the woman's daughter was and left. About 10 minutes later, she came back with our food, silently left it, gave us the side eye, and walked away. The waitress came back to refill the other table's water, where she asked everyone how the food was, but asked the doll, too. When she asked the doll, she spoke in a baby voice. The woman then picked up the doll, held it in front of her face, and spoke in a little girl's voice. She was being the doll. My other friend looked at me with the most terrified, wide-eyed expression. She worked with disturbed children as a therapist in a court-mandated facility. We shoveled our mediocre food down, and my friend Chris just dumped $40 on the table and we left. As we were leaving the town, Chris was looking for any sort of town name. I was checking to make sure we weren't being followed. This happened about 6 years ago, and we still can't find that town. No one remembers the name or the road it was off of, but we remember being there and what the diner looked like. Number 15. Growing up, my parents were divorced. My dad lived on a decent chunk of land with the house in the front. The backyard was a field. What? With the house in the front? Of course. The backyard was a field surrounded by trees, woods on 2 sides, and an open pasture on the other. So in the woods behind the house, there was this little river that my brother and I would play in, and we had a pretty good path there. We even dug steps into the side of a hill. So we mainly stayed there, but sometimes we would go down by the river, where it opened up into the field next door. Well, one day we decided to go deeper into the woods instead of down the river. So we take our little day packs and head off. The brush was really thick and was really slow going. So eventually my brother is like, fuck this, I'm out. Just because it was too thick and started to turn into a swamp. Well, I keep going. Probably about a mile away from the river, I find this concrete pillar and surrounded by trees and shit. So I do what any young kid would do, and I climb it. It's probably 8 feet tall, so it wasn't too hard. Well, on top of this pillar, there was a hole with metal rungs going down. I take out my flashlight and jump on, cause why not? I get to the bottom, which felt like maybe 6 or 7 feet following or below the ground. I could fully stand up but didn't have much headroom. And it was a concrete room. I looked around and it looked like it was well used. A dirty sleeping bag, empty canned foods, candles, some yard ornaments. The yard ornaments were stolen from us a few years prior. There were some books and a CD player. This freaked me the fuck out and I noped out real quick. It felt like I was being watched the whole way back to the river. I didn't tell anyone because I was a kid and I never went back. We eventually stopped playing by the river because it started sinking like sewage really bad. Stinking. I was pretty sure the neighbor was dumping shit near the river and it was seeping into the ground and the water. Ugh. Number 14. When I was about 12 years old, my mom and I were traveling across the country to move. We were staying the night in Missouri at a typical roadside hotel next to an Applebee's. So we went in for dinner. It was packed, despite us being one of the only people at the hotel. So we sat up at the bar. We noticed something weird after a few seconds. Every single person had a glass of milk in front of them. Even the dudes around the bar. Nobody had anything else, just a tall glass of milk. Someone opened the fridge under the center bar, and we just saw gallons of milk. The bartender took our dinner orders and brought each of us a glass of milk without asking for anything to drink. It was so fucking weird. My mom told me not to drink it. On our way back to our room, my mom stopped at the front desk and asked the woman working there, half jokingly and half concerned, why everyone drinks so much milk in this town. The woman said she had no idea what she was talking about, and we just moved on. When we were putting our leftovers in the mini fridge up in our room, there were like 10 mini cartons of milk. No brand, just the word milk in black lettering. It was a weird place, and I've never been able to figure it out. This happened 17 years ago, but it was a pretty formative experience doing a really weird road trip, and I recently posted this. He just goes on about nothing. Number 13. Story number 1. There is a town right near me in Pittsburgh where a whole street full of families disappeared overnight back in the 70s. Everything, bills, food, clothes, etc., were left behind. No trace of them to this day. You can Google map and look it up. The houses are abandoned and almost closed off from the rest of the town. Story 2. There was another instance that I'll never forget. I read it here on a creepiest Google map places. A man in Canada decided to drive until the highway stopped, sometime in the past couple of years. I believe he started in Winnipeg but kept going north-northwest until he ran out of road. About 1 to 2 hours before he got to that point, he saw a lot of cars parked off the side of the road. Keep in mind, there wasn't a single gas station or store nearby, and he hasn't seen a house for quite some time. There was a lot of about 30 to 35 cars. Year-old cars. From the 50s, the 60s. And in the distance, he saw a cavern entrance that was faintly illuminated by light. He noticed the tail end of a group of people dressed in all black walking in. No signs were around advertising what it was, and he said he couldn't find what it was on Google Maps. Just another cult. Number 12. My parents had a big farm when I was growing up, and all of the grandkids would help work it over the summer when we were out of school. Anytime we saw a rabbit, we were supposed to get it with the hoe or grab the shotgun. I was around 12 or so when I saw a little rabbit in the beans. I didn't want my grandfather to see it, so I tried to chase it off. I followed it into the brush, on the land, and for whatever reason I just kept following it because usually I'd lose sight of them pretty quickly once they hit the brush. I kept following it until I found what was clearly an old barn in ruin. These are pretty normal to happen upon where I'm from, and they're fun to look around. So, I went inside. It was weirdly kept up. Really well, with antique tools in great shape, fresh hay. I worried I had crossed into our neighbor's property, so I hightailed it out of there. I asked my grandfather about it, and he said our land went way far past what I had described. And I couldn't have left our land in the short amount of time I was gone. So he followed me out there, and we couldn't find it. I checked every summer I worked there and never found it again. Not exactly creepy, but it always drove me crazy. Where'd the stupid barn go? Number 11. By my hometown, there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of Niagara, so it had some climbable cliffs, some very shallow caves that you could crawl on. I went with some friends when I was 19 to 20. We were crawling around and found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there, had never even seen it before, so we pushed forward and decided to check it out. Even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave, and it was easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler than it was outside. Upon looking around with which light we had noticed, it was really clean inside the cave. As in, it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere like all the other caves did. And while we were in there, we got a really eerie feeling. We started hearing things. Feeling like we were being watched. Poked, pulled. Not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was so dark. We were just using our flashlights to see what was going around. Who knows, he could actually mean lighters. There's so many fucking foreign people writing in weird. Ugh. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others, although anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out there after only a few minutes. Idiot. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered, it was midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave, and we went back with flashlights the next week, but we have never been able to find the cave again. What are these stories? Number 10. The whole town and interstate was removed in 1962 to accommodate an enormous underground coal mine that's still burning today. I remember this. The whole neighborhood grid, weirdly I don't remember if there's houses still there or not, and the highway is still there, and there's still smoke coming up through the cracks in the street. The whole dystopian vibe that always accompanies an abandoned town, plus wondering if I'd fall through a hole in the street into some literal hellscape below, was plenty for me. I walked around for an hour or so, and then hightailed it out of there. Interesting. Interesting. Number 9. There's this old abandoned hotel a couple of hours away from me. It's not like a modern hotel. It's like an old Victorian house that was turned into a B&B. It's totally boarded up, big fence around it, barbed wire. Apparently it's pretty damn haunted. Apparently. In high school, me and some friends went to go check it out. It's in the middle of this circular road, but not a roundabout. You can go around several times before feeding back onto the main road. It takes about 90 seconds to go around this circle. So anyway, the first time we drive through, all the shades on the windows are drawn. We drive around again, only half of the shades are drawn. The next time we drive by, all the shades are open. We drove around one last time, and all the shades were drawn again. We were freaked out and drove the hell out of there. Huh. Well, isn't that something? Number 8. Was driving through Illinois to get to Chicago. This was around a decade ago with a group of friends, and we stop at a Taco Bell. The first thing we noticed was the workers were acting very odd. Everything they said was monotone and rehearsed. You mean like employees? After sitting in this fairly busy restaurant for a while, we kind of just looked at each other at the same time as we realized that none of the conversations happening around us made any sense. The people were speaking, and it was English, but the sentences weren't logical. They were just saying words at each other. We didn't say much about it until we got outside, at which point we all freaked out and confirmed each other's experiences at once. We got the fuck out of there. We jokingly referred to that place as the NPC Training Center, since the people didn't seem real, or they were learning how to be human or something. It still freaks me out. Places like this exist, but they're not accessible to the public. The fuck? Here's hoping you never run into the humans in training. Number 7. Ooh. I was relocating across Texas, as I normally do. Was driving through the night to skip traffic, because it's more serene that way. I was driving straight through central Texas, going northwest, so seeing the hill country change to desert in the full moon was super cool. Anyway, I was driving with my now ex-wife, and we were running low on gas. Luckily we were pulling into a tiny no-name town, and we could see an old gas station come around the bend. This encounter happened at about 2 a.m. Now, this town only has one road, and the station was right at the edge of the town at the end of it. When I say old, I mean very old. The type that you have no option of prepaying. You simply flip up the handle on the machine, you hear the pump inside start struggling to get the gas from the reservoir. It had the old style tick readers too. Not a thing electric about it. I, being the young man I was, had never seen one of these before, so I walked into the store to buy the gas before I pumped. The store only had one light in the far back on, and I almost thought it was closed since it was barely brighter inside than it was out in the moonlight. Upon entering, I saw the place was deserted. No customers, no workers, nothing. However, there was an odd tune playing on someone's radio that I couldn't place. An old-sounding, upbeat piano piece was playing somewhere around the corner inside, and I heard shuffling once I walked closer to the source. This place made me feel scared. Not the, whoa, this is creepy scared, but the all the hairs on end, something is seriously wrong here, but I can't figure it out scared. Jesus Christ, get out of your own asshole. Forgive me for interjecting, but honest to God, I hope and pray that half of the people writing these things are actually writers trying to make it work and trying to get somebody to give a shit about their fucking work. Because the day that I become such a fucking cumburger that I'm out here writing my anecdotes that are relevant to a question somebody wrote like this, dude. What takes more than 2 paragraphs? Ask yourself that. Ask yourself that. I went to a town. Town was fucking weird, you know? Old school gas station. Here's some pictures that I took. You know what I mean? Because people believe things that they are shown more than they're told, you know? But whatever, this is just for the sake of a ball-looking adventure through amateur writers' variety hour. As I turned the corner, I saw a young man standing next to a large radio and dancing. His dancing, though, was extremely off-putting and seriously didn't match the tune at all. Okay, my man. Okay. Though the radio was cranking out what sounded like ragtime, this guy was running his hands up and down his body and pretty much feeling himself with his eyes closed in what looked like bliss. He was going far slower than you know who I feel like right now? His ex-wife. Get me away from this nigga, okay? With his eyes closed in what looked like bliss, he was going far slower than the music and definitely wasn't on tempo. You know, that's your main thought. You up in this creaky old scary ass gas station because you need gas, and this dude out here dancing, and you're thinking, dance to the beat, motherfucker. You know what I mean? What the fuck? For some reason, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even move. I was in trance as every part of me screamed to turn and leave. Finally, I said, "Excuse me, I just need some gas." The guy kept dancing. I can take a break if some of y'all need to change your pants because you just pissed yourself. The guy kept dancing. I said it a little louder, and he finally slowed down a bit, opened his eyes, and focused on me. But it was like he was looking at a finely cooked steak. He was looking almost through me and silently walked to the register, not saying anything, and I said, $20, please? He again didn't say anything, just stood behind the ancient register, so I just figured maybe he didn't speak the language or was embarrassed. I caught him dancing, so I laid the money on the counter, went outside hoping he'd turn the pump. I filled up, told my wife about the weird-ass scene in there, and turned off the pump to kill the horrible grinding noise from the interior pump fighting against gravity to get the gas up. The weird thing is, when we were leaving, I looked back in the window and the guy was still standing there behind the counter. This may sound fine, but my money was still on the counter in front of him. It was like he was a robot who was just turned off once I left. This is where it gets super weird. Jesus Christ. A couple of months later, I was driving back to San Antonio to visit family, and we figured we'd stop at that old gas station to see it in the daytime since it became somewhat of a running joke between us. We pulled into this tiny town, and it was gone. The lot it sat on the end of the road wasn't even there. It was just grass, no rubble, no old pump, no lighting, nothing. It was like somebody picked it up and moved it. It looked like nothing had been there for years. I still get freaked out thinking about it. You know, I'm a man who's had a great many things happen to him. I've experienced some, reality bending scenarios. And I know enough to know that I don't know everything. And I know enough to know that I don't know anything. When you put on the plate the capacity for giggledy-froosh that exists in this world. So I do genuinely believe in scenarios with people just stumbling into some shit that ain't there, Maybe they're wandering into a place that was set up for them. Do you know what I mean? But I guess if I had to make a point here, it's that I'm not sure any of what we're going to read is legitimate, a legitimate regaling or reconstruction of such an experience. But maybe they'll be entertaining nonetheless. Number 6. In the interior of British Columbia, I spent a lot of time exploring in the truck. I found loads of abandoned buildings, cabins, but the coolest place that a friend showed me was an abandoned hippie commune deep in the forest. Now that sounds cool. There was some crazy house designs. One looked like an ark. One was a 40-foot teepee clad with aluminum. The place was clearly built by people who had very little building experience, but lots of creativity and motivation. There was a lot of weird stuff I found on the property, and I even found a bike that was stolen off me a year prior. I have an Imgur album. I'll find the link. You mean the dude has pictures? How interesting. Purple Donkey's all like, "This reminds me of a time I went RV camping." I'm kidding. With my family, and it was old-timey, Northern California. They had only a church channel from a show that was on like 20 years ago. I could hear the change rolling around in the night. While being in and out of sleep, my family got so creeped out that we left at 3 a.m. What do you mean you could hear the change rolling around in the night? Change. Okay. I don't know. Let's see this album. Pretty cool. Interesting. Number 4. I have a couple, but I'll choose just this one. Driving in rural areas of New England near the borders of Vermont and Mass, so I'm not sure which one I was in. It was late. So late that it was actually early, and there was fog. Dense, dense fog. All right there, Stephen King. Like Silent Hills level of fog, oh yeah. My God. Oh my God. Pick one, nigga. You can't be both. You could either be articulate and descriptive, or you could be like, oh man, I was out there and this shit was like an episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog, y'all. What the fuck? Like an idiot who dies in the opening scene of a horror movie, I am driving on back roads. Stop. Stop. First, my headlight just up and goes out. Cannot use high beams because of fog. I'm in the middle of nowhere. With Eustace. Oh, it's up to Courage, the Cowardly Dog. It lives in the middle of nowhere. I haven't seen a house or town in a long time. The car starts making noise. I check the check engine light comes on. So I pull over. Nothing much around, field and fog and dark. Did you mean to put a butt in there? Creepy as hell. I gamely look at the engine. I can fix electronics, not engines. Needed to put that in there. Yeah. I tighten all the things I know. The car now won't start. Nice. So I am in the dark in the middle of nowhere, on the side of the road. Because of the natural rules of how things work, my cell phone has no service as well. It is like one big cliche. But I am not stupid enough to go wandering the roads right now, so I recline my seat and decide to take a nap for a couple of hours until the sun comes up. I wake up, the sun is coming up, the fog is going away, and I am on the main street of a tiny town, parked in front of what looks like the Bates Motel, houses everywhere. It was the creepiest feeling. I was sure I was off in the woods. There was not a light of any on in any house all night. There was a service station 50 yards up the road. I walked up to it, talked to the guy who looked perfectly normal. He walked over to look at the car, asked me to try and start it, and it started. The fucking thing turned over right away. Both headlights were working. I drove on, never got the name of the little village, and I couldn't find it on a map. I always felt like I was in the big set of a horror movie that just didn't pan out. Hey, I'd upvote it too just because aliens, you know? You went to sleep. Aliens picked your ass up, was too lazy to drop you off in the right spot. Fuck this nigga. What he doing out in the middle of the woods anywhere, the aliens thought to themselves. Who dropped this nigga out here? We doing him a favor. Hey Larry, you fixing that car too? Yeah, this dumbass fucked it up. He opened up the hood and fucked the whole car up. I bet you he really thought he knew what he was doing in here. I'm good with electronics. Nigga. Number 3. If I can, okay. I've been living out of my car sometimes. There's a stretch of road in the southwest that runs along national forests. One night I was looking for a good dark pull-off to sleep in. I found a good one. It had trees to pull under, so the headlights out on the 2-lane wouldn't be as disturbing, as it has truck traffic. In the morning, I heard a car pull off. Let me see the word pull one more time in the story. And watched as it went on past me into the forest on a 2-track. I hadn't seen that lane when it was dark. It looked inviting. I decided to try driving on it myself. It turned out to be a lovely area, and eventually I found a really nice spot under the trees, out in there where it was very quiet and I could see the Milky Way at night, although it was sub-zero most nights. That's a cool character. I stayed out there for several days. Data service was good, so I kept applying. And during that time, I got an interview invitation, the first in a long time, and they called while I was sitting under those trees. The guy who called later told me that I sounded very relaxed. Heartened by that call, I drove out to the highway to get some groceries and water. When I came back up the highway, I could not find the original entry point. I found another 2-track and eventually got back to the same point, but that lane had no place to pull off and park. Months later, I took a temporary house about 40 miles from there and sometimes still use that stretch of highway. I look carefully every time I pass through, sometimes irritating other drivers. I have not yet found the original entry. None of the pull-offs have a lane at the back or even a break in the fence, and none of the lanes have even a slight wide spot. Do you go on to say that you can't find it? The end. Number 2. A couple years ago, a buddy and I turned around. Every now and then we got a little bit lonely and you never coming around on a side road in rural North Missouri. I had no service for GPS and it was pouring rain, so I headed south toward my destination, hoping to run into a main highway. We ended up coming into a town of Skidmore. It's a tiny town in the middle of nothing, but there's something dark about that place. Infamously in the 80s, a man known as the town bully was killed in broad daylight in the middle of the town. Not one person spoke up about who killed him, and it's never been solved despite many witnesses. I've heard of that story. Fuck that guy. He got what was coming to him. There's also been disappearances, a brutal crime a few years ago involving a baby being cut out of a woman's womb. Keep in mind, this is a town of only 270 people. As we drove down the main drag, several people gave us a blank but intimidating stare, completely unnerving. Once we got out of the town, my buddy mentioned that he had a sense of impending doom or danger as we drove through. Weirdly enough, I'd been feeling the same way. I'd never had such a persistent gut feeling of danger like that before. We agreed to never, ever fucking go through Skidmore again. There's something seriously evil about that town. It shouldn't exist. Skidmore. It ain't that evil, is it? It can't be that bad. Damn, baby. Damn. Somebody said I grew up in middle Missouri, and the people who live way out in the sticks have their own way of dealing with things. They don't trust outsiders much and handle problems themselves. A dude rapes a girl, maybe he'll end up disappearing and nobody knows about it. Man cheats on his wife, he suddenly has a bad accident on some stairs. There are more than a few bodies buried up in the hills, man. Bruh. How about you can't trust these hoes, so I ain't trying to live nowhere where shit goes down like that. Leave me alone. Can't trust these hoes. Number 1 on the list of 20 creepy stories of places that shouldn't exist reads as follows. Many years ago, my family and I moved from California to Nebraska. I was still a young kid, probably 5 to 6 years old. We were driving through Nevada, and shortly after Las Vegas, we needed to stop, fuel up. We stopped at your typical old school gas station that rings you when you pull up to the pump. I don't remember it that well. My dad told me it looked normal. He got out to stretch while my mom went inside to pay for gas. My mom said that when she walked in, the gas station had quite a few people inside, despite us being the only car there. When she walked up to the counter to pay for the gas, everyone turned to her, and the lights went out. She ran outside, where my dad witnessed everything and helped her into the car, and we sped off down the interstate. Not caring whether we ran out of gas or not, to this day, my mom says that's one of her scariest encounters because she can't explain nor figure out exactly what was going on. And yes, we found a better gas station down the road. and made it to Nebraska. Why you gotta? Obviously, nigga, you writing this story. Stupid bitch. Irrelevant. This isn't irrelevant. Now, this is a real story that somebody wrote because you're an idiot. You little autist. And yes, we found bitter gas station. Like it fucking matters. Somebody could have brought you gas if y'all broke down. You out here on that. But did you make it to Nebraska? Okay. There's that list, everyone. Slim pickings for shit to read out here. Hope you guys have a wonderful evening. And you'll see me again soon. Stay amazing. Stay out of Skidmore, apparently. Be careful. Skidmore. Later.